Brothers and sisters, there is a very important lesson to learn here from this story of Al-Hijrah of Umar and Ayyash. Umar told Ayyash, don't believe them, they want to deceive you. The important lesson to learn here is never ever trust Al-Kuffar. Do not trust them. Now you might argue and say, but my neighbor is such a nice person. My classmates are very nice. My co-workers, they're just fabulous people. They're so decent and honest. And you know, the only problem is that we Muslims are giving Islam a bad name. If these terrorists would just stop what they're doing and we give them da'wah in the right way, everybody's going to become Muslim. Now, I'm not going to argue that your neighbor is not a nice person or your classmate, or they truly might be decent and nice people. But brothers, when you make a judgment about kufr, you do not make a judgment based on your neighbor and then you make qiyas, all right? And you generalize and you make a judgment according to one person that you know. Because this person that you know is not the one calling the shots. And when Quran talks about kuffar, it talks about the leaders of kufr, the ones who are pulling the strings. Don't make a judgment on kufr based on Jane Doe and John Doe. You don't make it based on Joe Six-Pack or Sally Soccer Mom. You make the judgment based on the leaders of al-kufr. And these are the ones whom Allah Azza wa Jal talked about in Quran and gave them the name al-Mala'. In one verse after another, Allah Azza wa Jal talks about al-Mala'. Quran doesn't waste its time talking about the people who are just fillings and don't make any decisions. Quran talks about the decision makers on both sides, on the camp of good and the camp of evil. But the followers, because they don't care, Quran doesn't care about them either. Just like in the story of As-Sabt, when this is a story that happened among Banu Israel, they divided into 3 camps. One camp was committing evil, which was fishing on the Sabbath. The second camp was making amr bil ma'ruf and nahy al munkar. They were telling them that what you're doing is wrong. And then there was a third camp who stayed quiet. Allah Azza wa Jal told us the fate of the evildoers, that they were transformed into pigs and monkeys. That's in Surah Al-A'raf. And it tells us about the ones who were preventing this evil, that they were saved, and it completely ignores about the third who did nothing. Allah Azza wa Jal, He talks about al-Mala'. Allah Azza wa Jal says, قَالَ الْمَلَأُ مِنْ قَوْمِهِ إِنَّا لَنَرَاكَ فِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. Allah Azza wa Jal says that the leaders of the people of Nuh said, you are being deceived, you are misled. Allah Azza wa Jal says about Ad, قال الملأ الذين كفروا من قومه إنا لنراك في سفاهة وإنا لنظنك من الكاذبين. The leaders of the people of Ad said, إننا لنراك في سفاهة. We see that you have a feeble mind and we think that you are a liar. So it's talking about the leaders. Allah Azza wa Jal says about the people of Shu'aib, قال الملأ الذين استكبروا من قومه لنخرجنك يا شعيب والذين آمنوا معك من قريتنا أو لتعودن في ملتنا. The leaders of the people of Shu'aib said, we're going to drive you out of our land, you and the ones who followed you, if you don't give up your religion. Allah Azza wa Jal says about the people of Fir'aun, قال الملأ من قوم فرعون إن هذا لساحر عليم. The leaders of the people of Fir'aun said that Musa is a knowledgeable sorcerer. It also says about them, وقال الملأ من قوم فرعون أتذر موسى وقومه ليفسدوا في الأرض ويذرك وآلهتك قال سنقتل أبناءهم ونستحيي نساءهم وإنا فوقهم قاهرون. This is talking about the people of Fir'aun who are lobbying. They're lobbying Fir'aun and they're inciting him. They said, you're going to leave Musa to do whatever he wants? That is when Fir'aun said, we're going to kill them. So they are lobbying Fir'aun to kill the believers. These are al-Mala'. وجاء رجل من أقصى المدينة يسعى قال يا موسى إن الملأ يأتمرون بك ليقتلوك فاخرج فإني لك من الناصحين. A man came from the other end of town to warn Musa and tell him that the leaders are plotting to kill you. Leave, I'm giving you a sincere advice. Brothers, that's what they're doing today. They're plotting to kill this religion. Don't make qiyas based on your friend. who's not the decision maker. Allah Azza wa Jal is telling you that the leaders of kufr are plotting against you. And Allah Azza wa Jal says that they're plotting so much, He says, بَلْ مَكْرُ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ. They're plotting night and day. And their plotting is so great. Allah Azza wa Jal says about it, وَإِن كَانَ مَكْرُهُمْ لِتَزُولَ مِنْهُ الْجِبَالِ. Their plotting is sufficient to move the mountains from their places. After all of this, you're going to trust them? You know, these nice neighbors and wonderful co-workers and friends, all what it needed was for Milosevic to tell them that the Muslims are evil people. That's all what was needed. And they pounced on the Muslims like wild beasts. This is in 20th century Europe. So those who are counting on democracy and human rights and the civilized world and Amnesty International, don't be fooled. Allah Azza wa Jal is telling you that they are up to no good. And Allah Azza wa Jal tells you, وَاللَّهُ أَعْلَمُ بِأَعْدَائِكُمْ. Allah Azza wa Jal knows your enemies. Are you going to go with what Allah Azza wa Jal tells you, or are you going to go with your assumptions? Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَدُّوا لَوْ تَكْفُرُوا كَمَا كَفَرُوا فَتَكُونُونَ سَوَاءً. They want you to disbelieve so that you would become equal to them. وَلَن تَرْضَى عَنْكَ الْيَهُودُ وَلَا النَّصَارَى حَتَّى تَتَّبِعَ مِلَّتَهُم. The Jews and the Christians will not be pleased until you become like them. How can you have trust in the leaders of kufr when today, right now, there are Muslim brothers who are in jail? Every sinister method of interrogation is used against them. They would use against them homosexuals to rape them. They would bring their mothers and sisters and wives, and they would rape them in front of these brothers. Now, it's true that this is not happening in the West, but the West knows about it. The United Nations knows about it. Amnesty International knows about it, and they're doing nothing. In fact, sometimes they are encouraging it. This is something happening today. And we've seen yesterday what happened to our brothers in Bosnia. So Allah Azza wa Jal tells you in Quran what you need to know. But the thing is that many of us are gullible and naive. Umar ibn Khattab knew it very well. He said, مَا يُرِيدُ إِلَّا لِيَفْتِنُوكَ عَنْ دِينِكَ. All what they want is to deceive you from your religion. That's what they're up to. So we need to wisen up and not be duped. Malcolm X used to say, we've been bamboozled. By the way, this thing about, no, it's not going to happen to us. This is the civilized world, democracy, human rights. Brothers and sisters, when it comes to religious freedom, Mecca maybe had more religious freedom than the West today. Before the da'wah of Muhammad ﷺ, Mecca had Christians, it had Jews, it had followers of the religion of Ibrahim, and they were tolerated. There was Waraq bin Nawfal, who was a Christian. There was Zayd bin Amr bin Nufail, who was on the religion of Ibrahim, and Jews used to come in and out. But the thing is that the system of kufr will tolerate everything. It will tolerate gays and lesbians, but it's not going to tolerate the message of truth. That's how the system of shaitan is designed. When it comes to freedom of speech, Suq Akadh is equal or better to the Speaker's Corner of Hyde Park. The tradition of freedom of speech in Mecca was great. You could go, stand up and say whatever you want. Nobody's going to harm you. It was a pretty much democratic system in Quraysh. There wasn't a tyrant. They didn't have this one leader who was imposing these military rules on them. Everyone in Mecca could do whatever they want. It was a very, very free society. But the thing is, when Islam came in the scene, it was not tolerated. Because that's the way of shaitan. He will tolerate everything except the truth. So beware and be cautious. Take the advice of Umar. Be careful. Do not trust the enemies of Allah. Especially, brothers, do not trust the mouthpiece of shaitan, the Western media. The brother comes to you and says, you know what happened? What happened? This and this and this. Brother, where did you hear it? Reliable sources. What? CNN. It was on a 2-hour documentary on CNN. Man, they showed everything. Be careful. And back to the issue of the masses of the people. The masses of the people are decent and they're nice. But the thing is, if they do not wake up from the dream world they're living in, they're not going to wake up until they end up in hellfire. And then they will blame the leaders and say, you are the ones who brought us here. And they will ask Allah Azza wa Jal to multiply the punishment on the leaders. And there are quite a few conversations in Quran that happen between the leadership and the followers. And Allah Azza wa Jal gives us the reason why. فَاسْتَخَفَّ قَوْمَهُ فَأَطَاعُوهُ إِنَّهُمْ كَانُوا قَوْمًا فَاسِقِينَ. Allah Azza wa Jal says, Fir'aun belittled his people, so they followed him. They were a people who were corrupt. So Allah Azza wa Jal said that the masses followed Fir'aun. Why? Because they were fasiqeen, they had fusuq, they were attached to dunya. They were attached to their jobs, they were attached to the status quo, they were attached to their shahawat, their desires. And that misled them. That's how their leaders tricked them. So, in Bosnia, that's what happened. They were very nice. I mean, a brother was telling me that they used to date our women. They used to be very close to us, neighbor to neighbor, very close. But then Milosevic tricked them by bringing up these false legends of history and these nationalistic songs and all of that. It inspired the people and they turned against the Muslims. They were so gullible and naive that all what it took were a few nationalistic songs and a few events in history that are fabricated and not true, and they just attacked the Muslims. That's how easy it was to deceive these masses, who were otherwise, before that, very decent and honest and nice people. But the thing is that many of the people just follow what is told, what they're told.